And I'd like to now introduce our keynote speaker. Hopefully I'll say her name right. I was practicing before. Simin Farkhondeh. And she's an education director at Democracy Now!, an independent news hour. Simin is an award-winning filmmaker, artist, educator, and activist. She has taught at numerous colleges and universities. She directs films with a progressive message, and her work has appeared on multiple places, PBS, Whitney Museum, Margaret Mead Film Festival, and elsewhere. And she also was co-director of the award-winning film anti-war deep dish TV series, Gulf Crisis TV Project, and director of the acclaimed TV series Labor at the Crossroads. We are honored to have Simin here today, so please join me now in giving her a warm welcome.
Hello everyone. Thank you. Okay, thank you so much. I'm really honored to be here. It's wonderful to be here at the Kota-alliance event. And I wanted to first of all thank Mina Aslama Horowitz for naming me to come and talk this morning, and the Kota-alliance, Jana Renstrom and Sonja Likkonen. Am I saying it right? Okay, thank you so much. I was invited to speak about the question how to communicate gender issues and social justice to the media. And while I was preparing this, I thought it would be good to just talk about my own journey a little bit and then intersplice some lessons that I've been using along the way. So I'm going to try to do that. And hopefully the PowerPoint will work very well so far. So the image that you see now is from the times 1978-79 in Iran, the Islamic Iranian Revolution, and that was where I grew up, and I was witness to some of the upheavals that happened during that time. It was a very strange time for us, many changes, as a youngster, very unknown what the future would bring. And at the time I started me and my friends, we started reading many newspapers, gathering as much media as we could to really get a sense of what was going on. It was very difficult to just look at one newspaper and get a sense. So even in those years, I started this idea of reading between the lines, trying to interpret what was going on through many different sources. And I think that that was a really big lesson for me to diversify where I got my information. In those years, I also started realizing that much of the knowledge that I had about the world was conveyed through American or Western corporate media, because there too in Iran, we watched American films, we had American music, and it was a very certain and perhaps skewed way of how I understood the world, how I understood what femaleness is, how I understood what work issues are, what people of color are, and so forth, what the Middle East is, what Africa is, what America is. So that too was a lesson I think I learned through the time of the revolution, to really understand and think about, or at least the beginnings of that consciousness, of how to demystify the media, and that it's so important to do that. As I moved through college and finally came to America, I started working with a group called Paper Tiger Television. It's a women-run organization. It still exists today. It was created in 1989 by one of my big mentors, Didi Halleck, and I think somebody there knows her, yes? Didi Halleck, who started this collective along with other young women who felt that it was really important in the United States context also to deconstruct media. So Paper Tiger, what it does is, and it's done so since '81, is to take media products such as Vogue magazine or Cosmopolitan or Dynasty the show or the New York Times or whatever media that you can think of, and deconstruct it and demystify it. And so what we did as a group was we taught each other filmmaking, because some of the people, and there's a picture of just a few of them, some of them were graduates from film school, some others were journalists, some others were painters. So we brought a collective of not just people interested in deconstructing media, but a collective of knowledge, in a way, together, and we taught each other how to make this one half-hour weekly show that we then put on public access. And I don't know if people know anything about public access, but in the United States and in some other countries, there's this open channel that in those years, this was late 80s, we knew we could use, and oftentimes they have free studio space and free equipment. So the idea that, yes, collectively own equipment and make films, but also find ways to access places that we could do this. And so for years we would do this show called Paper Tiger Television. It's 8:30. Do you know where your brains are? And then we would look at, well, where are our brains when we look at Cosmopolitan? What are we dished out there about our bodies, about your bodies, about fashion, and so forth? So it really was a fun and very handmade way of, taking it all apart and putting it perhaps together in a different way. Our motto was smash the myths of the information industry. And that really stuck with me, that idea of smashing the myths. And I'm going to move forward for a moment. And so that motto of deconstruction and media literacy was one really important component. The other one, production, making our own films, right? Bringing our own voices forth, and the distribution of that, make your voice heard, that idea, and access. And then the last one, active citizenry, communicating with the communicators, or making alternative communiques next to them. I wrote those three down because I thought that throughout my talk I will go back to those notions. But I think that those are really important when we are media makers. And as I understand it today, we're going to talk about various ways, right, of making films, news, paper articles, drawings, paintings, and so forth, media. So those things, I think, are really important if we want to be actively making strong and insightful media, and or creating access for others, or a bridge for others to make it. So I'm just going to show you a potpourri of things, and I hope that if you're interested, you'll go and find out more on your own, because the 20 minutes will go by real fast. So Deep Dish TV was another organization that I worked with during after and during Paper Tiger years, and those were this is another non-profit grassroots organization, and the motto there was, yes, we're going to do videos about our own ideas, but also how can we create a venue for people across the country to bring in their ideas. So we would do these hour-long pieces on particular topics, like women's issues, like youth, like farming, like labor, like Central America, Middle East, and what have you. And we would do an outreach, because another thing is, when you make your films, it's one thing, but outreach and distribution is another. You want to have people see it, right? So we developed this outreach network, and we would tell video artists, activists all over the country, hey, we're doing this series. Send us your materials. We want to place it into this 1 hour and put it onto satellite, and then we will distribute it, and then again people could see the work. So really creating, I think, in a creative way, venues for ourselves to show our work. So making the work is really important, but while making it, thinking about who is going to be the audience, where are we going to show the work, where are we going to distribute the work. Of course, with the web, with the internet, this is much easier. These years there was no web. I mean, we thought satellite technology was the end all, right? I mean, but nowadays things are much different. Another group another project that I worked on after Deep Dish was called Labor at the Crossroads. I directed this show for 10 years. It was a program that was distributed to university channels all over this country and sometimes abroad, and also public access again, and it was on CUNY TV and cable. And it was a half-an-hour show really looking at work issues, another thing that we don't talk about, even though we're all working, right? But labor and work is often not mentioned. And so our thing was to really talk about what is labor. And we found that even when we go out to interview someone, what is labor? Somebody will think pregnancy, babies. No, it's the 8-hour workday. It's the weekend. Those things are labor, and we are all a part of that. But yet we don't know so much the history of it. We don't know how we got here, and we may not know that we have to hold on to what we have very hard, because we can lose it very easily too, right, in these times. So that project was Labor at the Crossroads. Its job was to really ask those difficult questions, not just of the bosses, so-called, but also of the unions. New York in those years, I'm talking 1994 to about 2005, was much more a union town. I think it's not so much anymore, but at that time it was more visible anyway, the unions. So those are just a few organizations that I worked with, and in this Labor at the Crossroads, we also started a worker video training program. So always in the production, for me, it was also important to create a way that others could produce, and that others could learn to produce well. Because it's one thing to point your camera, but how do you angle it? What is the most dynamic framing of an image? How can you speak to an audience? What makes it interesting? What makes it important, but at the same time humanizing? So all those questions are important, but I think it's important to also pass them on. So again, deconstruct, production, distribution, active citizenry. Right? Excuse me. So I put that in there, equal access for all, because that connects to that active citizenry. In the 90s, we were slowly learning that there's video cameras that are so light and everybody can use them. But think about it. The video camera first came out, Sony first came out with a Portapack, a very heavy camera that had its tape recording in one aspect of it and the camera on another in 1965. And that was the first time when people could actually take the camera outside of a studio and video themselves and see simultaneously what that could be. Very different from film, a very different experience. So access for all today is sort of unimportant perhaps, because everyone has a cell phone, but there is a digital divide, and we may sometimes forget that. But not everyone does have even a cell phone, right? And so many of us do, and if we do, we can share it, and we have to share it. But also that access is, again, very fragile. We know that net neutrality is right now on the line. It was voted against by the FCC. Those are the active citizenry issues of the day, besides all the others that we have on our plate right now, right, which are many. But tell your story is very important, I think. And I think this resonates today for those who are makers in whatever medium you're working in. I just wanted to say name a few organizations that in New York I worked with, and that are really wonderful organizations that people can explore. Third World Newsreel, which is a place where you can learn how to make dynamic, important films, dynamic and well-done films. It's in New York City. They also distribute one of my films. They distribute work. They have workshops all the time. There's DCTV, that's Downtown Community TV Center, a center where they do both professional video and independent alternative video, or I should say, teach video in an affordable way. There's MNN, that's Manhattan Neighborhood Network, which is also in Manhattan, a public access station that is free. And the reason why it's there with equipment that's usable by all Manhattan residents is because of that active citizenry that the independent media community pushed for in the 90s and early 2000s. So none of these things are just coming out of the blue. It's really out of working together as a group to have that vision become possible. So one of the films that I personally worked on is called Caught Between Two Worlds, and I was hoping to show a little bit, but I think that we don't have the time, right? We do have the time? This is a film, it's an hour-long documentary, And it is an attempt to look at the Iranian immigrant community here, understanding that whenever you say Iran, I mean, I experience this all the time, there is a real misunderstanding, I think, of what that means. People see images of maybe Khomeini and terrorism come up, or axis of evil, or, well, the question I always get is, yes, but the women. Yes, but the women. Well, the women are very dynamic in Iran. They've done very hard work in the past 40 years to push and create space for themselves. There are women filmmakers, there are women artists, there are women lawyers, there are women doctors. So it was a project to try to really challenge our notion of, what Iranians are, And I think it's always still prevalent because constantly we're back in square one. We're always fearing as Iranians that there may be a war, that country is next. So again, the importance of changing people's minds, of having an alternative to what the corporate media is showing is so crucial because it really impacts many, many people's lives. Actually, I wanted to put another image in there, but I forgot to do that, and that was, there is a group of, there is an emergency cinema coming out of Syria. It's called Abu Nadara. I don't know if people know this. It's called Abu Nadara. You can find their work on the internet. And since 2010, they have been putting out a short video of 30 seconds to 4 minutes every Friday. Friday is sort of the Sunday in the Islamic world, right? Friday. So every Friday since 2010, they've put out a nugget of what life in Syria is like. And you know what they say? They say it's emergency cinema because we have to combat the images of what Syria has become in the mind of the mass media. And I think that it's so crucial, that kind of creating space next to that corporate entity, that corporate image or representation. So do you think, I mean, I wanted to show 2 videos, so 2 times 5. So I'm afraid that maybe we don't have, do we have time?
Yeah, go ahead. I think, so we have maybe about, I know you want to,
Okay.
I'm not sure how you can split that up.
All right. You know what? I can send the link to people, and then you can all watch it on your own time. How's that? Yes? Okay, good. Good. So another film that I did in the past years is called Who Gives Kisses Freely from Her Lips. This one looks at this case of several women and how they navigate in Iran the situation of marriage and divorce and how they create agency for themselves within that context. I'm just bringing those 2 examples because I think that they are notions of my telling my story and trying to create space and dialogue around what I think is an area that people don't know enough about. So I wanted to ask everyone to think for a minute, where do you get news and information about the world? Where do you get your news? And just think about that. How do you gather what you know about what's happening around you? And of course, you are all aware of this, but the corporate media has become more and more consolidated, right? And I have this nifty image over here. In 1983, it used to be many, many organizations, right? And now in 2011, there is only 6. And I think right now it's even smaller. It's shrunk. I think it's Disney, Viacom, Time Warner, CBS, and News Corp. I think that's the 5 right now. So more and more we have the shrinking of organizations into smaller, big conglomerates, but fewer organizations owning them. And we see more and more journalists leaving, more and more news desks closing. So it really begs the question, where are we going to get our detailed, contextualized information about the world? Where are we going to get that? And I think it is in the independent realm. And of course also on the internet, because the internet has become the place where we find the story of the marginalized, women of color, LGBTQ folks, workers, people from faraway places that we don't have access to otherwise. And so that is a very important thing, I think. I put a little quote in here from Noam Chomsky, a philosopher of our time. The general population doesn't know what's happening, and it doesn't even know that it doesn't know. And that's really a problem, I think. But I think the remedy is what Angela Davis says to us. We have to talk about liberating minds as well as liberating society. And that's where we, as makers and producers, come in, I think. Makers, producers, enablers, distributors, right? And finally, how much time do I have?
About 3 minutes.
Okay, 3 minutes. Okay, so I am right now education director at Democracy Now, and I don't know how many people know Democracy Now as a group. Oh wow, quite a few. Well, wonderful. So there, I was asked in 2011 to design their education department, and so since then, what I've done is we've done a massive outreach campaign to educators all over the city and the country, and sometimes the world, because we do have sometimes virtual discussions with university students in Helsinki or Madrid or elsewhere. But mostly we try to bring students into our space to watch our live broadcast. It's a free opportunity. And then afterwards we discuss what is the relationship between independent media and social justice and gender issues and change. And so we talk about that. We talk about how can a news story that really goes deep into something and contextualizes a situation impact an audience to think differently, if not to work for change. And then what I had was for you just a little lesson that I work with, that I use with the students a lot, which is to examine the news. And we do a quick framing exercise, a quick lesson on empowerment. I call it because I think that once we think about how something is framed, in other words, what the goals are that people have when they show something, when they make something, even a poster, right? Even a film, whatever. And I have all kinds of things about what framing means, but I know you guys know what framing means. Framing refers to the way media gatekeepers organize and present the stories they cover and the way audiences interpret it, what they are provided. So we made in our little department this palm card of power, which gives us several questions. Can you all see them? Several questions that really help students to analyze and deconstruct and think critically of the media they consume. And this could even be a textbook. I mean, maybe that's radical, but even history books have a point of view, right? So perspective, whose voice drives the story? Ownership, who interests are being served? World view, what cultural narratives, what dominant narratives and stereotypes are being advanced? Effects, what impact does the story have on me, the viewer? And representation, is there diversity? Who's being shown? Think about class, race, gender, identity, and so forth. So maybe I'll leave you with that video that I was going to show.
Yeah, and I think what we can do, we all have a newsletter. If you don't know, we can around some of the.
Oh, that's good. Yeah, that's good. And just one more thing is that, I mean, to talk about the part how to communicate to the media. In terms of Democracy Now, there is a part on the website that you who are actually doing journalistic work can go to and send story ideas. And every day we get many, many story ideas. The producers get them, we read every single one. And many of our stories, because it's a nonprofit and a small organization, we don't have journalists all over the world. That means that we rely on citizen journalists and on filmmakers and on documentary makers and so forth. So,
yeah, I think enough for maybe a question. I just have a comment. So, Simin, thank you very much. And I think we tend to think that it's so easy to
social media campaigning and little videos, and I see don't right now for such purpose, but made an extremely good point. This avalanche of messages. First of all, we have to create our message. Nobody's going to, or maybe democracy now, but we have to also create the platform for them. Yes. And secondly, they have to be of high quality, and that just reminded me of an organization based in Brooklyn called Witness. They teach people to use social media in protest in order for us not to harm. It'll show somebody protesting who authorities should, and really focusing on how to get our message across effectively. And now it's more important for us to understand what our frame is, who we want to reach, what the message. So thank you for reminding us of that.
You know, I just want to add something that I think would be important to note here. You know, a group like Democracy Now! I didn't have time to get into the history, but it's been around for 22 years almost. And it has done so through viewer sponsorship. Viewer sponsorship. In other words, listeners and viewers see a product, I don't even want to call it product, but the language of the day, that they find is important to fund. And therefore, it's been funded. And I think that means a lot. Like you can really develop that. You know? And so that movement of supporters has grown and grown. And the idea of being in touch with every one of those people, if they send $5 or $100, whatever, is really crucial, to be in contact with them and to take them along on this journey. And that's, I think, one of the success stories. From all the organizations I named, I think Democracy Now!, which is a grassroots organization, woman-run, as you know, has done it the best in that way, learning from the others. Thank you. You're welcome.